Relationships are the cornerstone of our lives. They shape who we are, influence how we see the world, and determine the quality of our experiences. Yet not all relationships are meant to last. Some serve as profound lessons, while others become burdens that erode our sense of self. The question is, how do you know when it's time to walk away? If you see these signs, it's worth reevaluating whether staying in that relationship aligns with your long-term well-being. Let's begin with the first and most fundamental issue, the erosion of trust. Trust is the backbone of any relationship. Without it, everything else crumbles. If your partner lies to you, withholds critical truths, or betrays you, you're no longer standing on solid ground. Think about what trust actually means. It's the belief that the other person will act in your best interest even when you're not watching. If that belief is repeatedly shattered, ask yourself, are you building a future or merely patching cracks in a foundation that's already broken? Trust is the invisible thread that weaves together the fabric of a meaningful relationship. It's not just about believing in someone's words, it's a deep-seated confidence in their intentions, actions, and character. When trust begins to erode, it destabilizes the foundation upon which the relationship is built, leading to doubt, insecurity, and often heartbreak. The erosion of trust doesn't happen suddenly. It's a gradual process that often starts subtly and grows insidiously over time. This phenomenon can be better understood through a psychological lens with examples and insights that illustrate the profound impact it has on individuals and their relationships. Imagine a scenario where one partner discovers that the other has been withholding information about their spending habits. On the surface, it might seem like a minor issue, perhaps a small purchase here or a hidden bill there. However, this breach of honesty sets off a chain reaction. Psychologically, the partner who discovers this omission may begin to question whether they can rely on the other's word in more significant matters. This doubt doesn't remain confined to finances. It starts to creep into other areas of the relationship, creating an undercurrent of suspicion. Over time, the betrayed partner may develop hypervigilance, constantly looking for signs of further dishonesty, which undermines their ability to relax and feel secure in the relationship. One of the most profound breaches of trust is betrayal, which psychologist Shirley Glass described as a knife that cuts through the heart of a relationship. Betrayal, whether it's infidelity, breaking a promise, or violating personal boundaries, goes beyond mere dishonesty. It strikes at the core of the relationship's emotional safety. For instance, imagine a partner who promises to stand by their significant other during a critical life challenge, perhaps an illness or career transition, only to abandon them when things get difficult. The betrayed partner not only feels the sting of the broken promise, but also internalizes a deep sense of inadequacy, wondering if they were ever truly valued. This kind of wound is challenging to heal because it disrupts the betrayed individual's ability to trust not just their partner, but often themselves as they question their judgment and capacity to discern character. The concept of trust is closely tied to consistency. Consistency in behavior and communication provides a sense of stability and predictability, both of which are essential for psychological well-being. When a partner's actions don't align with their words, it creates cognitive dissonance, a psychological state where conflicting beliefs or behaviors generate discomfort. For example, a partner who repeatedly assures their significant other of their love but fails to show up emotionally or physically in moments of need creates a confusing and painful dynamic. Over time, this inconsistency fosters a sense of disconnection as the injured party begins to protect themselves emotionally, often withdrawing to avoid further disappointment. Psychologist Brené Brown, a leading researcher on trust and vulnerability, emphasizes that trust is built in very small moments. It's not grand gestures, but rather the accumulation of everyday acts of reliability and care that fortify the bond between two people. Conversely, when these small moments are neglected or violated, trust erodes piece by piece. Consider the example of a partner who promises to support their significant other in pursuing a dream, but consistently undermines them with critical remarks or a lack of follow-through. These small betrayals of commitment add up, creating a chasm that eventually feels impossible to bridge. The erosion of trust often leads to a breakdown in communication. Partners may stop sharing their fears, vulnerabilities, and dreams, fearing judgment, rejection, or further betrayal. This withdrawal is not merely emotional but physiological as well. studies in psychology have shown that betrayal activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain. This overlap explains why people describe betrayal as feeling like a gut punch or stab to the heart. The body reacts with heightened stress responses, making it difficult to think clearly or engage in meaningful problem solving. One of the most troubling aspects of eroded trust is the psychological toll it takes on the individual. Constant suspicion and doubt can lead to anxiety, depression, and even symptoms of trauma. This is particularly evident in relationships where gaslighting, a manipulative tactic that causes the victim to doubt their perception of reality, is present. A gaslit partner might find themselves questioning their memory, instincts, and emotional reactions, further isolating them and compounding the damage to their self-esteem. Rebuilding trust, while possible, is one of the most challenging undertakings in any relationship. It requires consistent effort, transparency, and genuine remorse. However, even with the best intentions, it's important to recognize that some breaches of trust leave scars too deep to fully heal. As Ernest Hemingway once wrote, the best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to trust them, but if that trust is broken repeatedly, it may be wiser to walk away than to continue investing in a dynamic that only causes pain. The erosion of trust is not just about what happens between two people, it's about the impact it has on your sense of self. When trust is violated, it forces you to question the relationship, your partner, and your own ability to judge character and set boundaries. This self-doubt can ripple into other areas of your life, affecting how you approach future relationships and even your broader outlook on human connection. Understanding the subtle and overt ways trust erodes and the psychological consequences it carries is essential in making the difficult but necessary decision to protect your well-being. Boundaries are the invisible lines that define where one person ends and another begins. They represent an individual's sense of autonomy, identity, and personal values. In relationships, respecting boundaries is not merely a matter of courtesy, it's a fundamental act of recognizing and valuing the other person as a unique individual. When these boundaries are disrespected, the dynamic shifts from one of mutual respect to one of control, neglect, or manipulation. This disregard can manifest in various ways, each carrying profound psychological implications that can harm the person whose boundaries are violated. Consider the example of emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries are the limits we set to protect our feelings and mental well-being. A partner who dismisses or invalidates their significant other's emotions is effectively saying, "Your feelings don't matter." For instance, imagine a situation where someone expresses vulnerability, perhaps admitting they feel overwhelmed by work or personal struggles, only to be met with a dismissive response like, "You're overreacting," or "That's not a big deal." Over time, such reactions teach the individual that sharing their emotions is unsafe, leading to a sense of isolation within the relationship. This suppression can result in anxiety or depression, as the person begins to internalize the belief that their emotions are not valid or worthy of attention. Physical boundaries are another critical area. These include personal space, bodily autonomy, and the right to control one's own physical interactions. A partner who disregards these boundaries, whether by invading personal space without consent, ignoring a request to slow down physical intimacy, or pressuring the other into actions they're uncomfortable with, creates an environment where the individual feels powerless. This loss of autonomy is not just a relational issue, it's a psychological one. The person whose boundaries are violated may begin to experience feelings of helplessness, fear, or even trauma, particularly if the violations are persistent or severe. Time and energy boundaries are equally significant, yet often overlooked. These boundaries protect a person's right to decide how they spend their time and where they direct their energy. A partner who constantly demands attention, interrupts personal projects, or disregards their significant other's need for solitude is essentially prioritizing their own needs over the other person's well-being. This imbalance can lead to burnout and resentment, as the person on the receiving end feels their time and individuality are not being respected. They may struggle with guilt for wanting time to themselves, which further erodes their sense of identity within the relationship. One of the most insidious forms of boundary violations involves controlling behavior. This can be overt, such as monitoring a partner's movements or dictating who they can and cannot see, or subtle, like using guilt or manipulation to influence decisions. Control disguises itself as concern or love, but is ultimately rooted in a lack of respect for the other person's agency. Psychologically, being in a controlling relationship can lead to learned helplessness, a state where the individual feels incapable of making their own choices or standing up for themselves because their autonomy has been consistently undermined. Dr. John Gottman, a leading relationship psychologist, has emphasized that respect is the cornerstone of any healthy relationship. Without respect for boundaries, there can be no genuine partnership because one person's needs and identity are consistently subordinated to the other's desires. When boundaries are violated, it's not just the boundary itself that is breached, it's the underlying principle that each person in the relationship deserves to be treated as a full, autonomous individual. The consequences of boundary violations extend beyond the immediate discomfort or frustration they cause. Over time, they reshape the dynamics of the relationship, creating patterns of dominance and submission, resentment and guilt, or withdrawal and overreach. These patterns can be difficult to break, especially if the person whose boundaries are being violated begins to doubt their right to set limits in the first place. For example, someone who has been repeatedly told you're being too sensitive might start to question their own perceptions, leading to a diminished sense of self-worth. From a psychological perspective, respecting boundaries is about recognizing the other person's humanity. It's an acknowledgement that they have their own needs, desires, and fears separate from yours. Violating boundaries, on the other hand, is a form of dehumanization. It reduces the other person to an extension of yourself, disregarding their individuality and autonomy. This kind of dynamic not only harms the person whose boundaries are crossed, but also stunts the growth of the relationship itself, preventing it from becoming a true partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. Emotional manipulation is a covert form of control designed to influence another person's thoughts, feelings, or behaviors to serve the manipulator's agenda. Unlike overt domination, which is easily recognizable, emotional manipulation operates subtly, often leaving the victim confused, doubting their own perceptions, and questioning their sense of reality. This tactic is particularly insidious because it exploits emotions which are deeply personal and foundational to human connection to achieve control over another individual. The effects of emotional manipulation can be profound, undermining the victim's confidence, autonomy, and mental well-being. One common method of emotional manipulation is gaslighting, a tactic where the manipulator distorts facts or denies events to make the victim question their memory, perception, or sanity. For example, imagine a scenario where someone confronts their partner about hurtful behavior, perhaps a derogatory comment or an act of neglect, only to be told, "You're imagining things," or "You're too sensitive." Over time, this repeated denial of reality causes the victim to second-guess their experiences and instincts, leaving them dependent on the manipulator for validation. Psychologically, gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse that can lead to anxiety, depression, and even symptoms of trauma as the victim loses trust in their own judgment. Another tactic often used in emotional manipulation is guilt tripping. This involves making the victim feel responsible for the manipulator's emotions or actions. For instance, a partner might say, "If you really loved me, you'd do this for me." Or, "I can't believe you'd hurt me like this after everything I've done for you." These statements are designed to shift the focus away from the manipulator's behavior and onto the victim's sense of obligation or guilt. The victim, wanting to alleviate the perceived harm, may comply with the manipulator's demands, further enabling the cycle of control. Psychologically, guilt tripping creates a power imbalance by exploiting the victim's empathy and desire for harmony. Emotional manipulators also use fear as a tool to control. This fear can be direct, such as threats of abandonment or retaliation, or indirect, like creating an atmosphere of unpredictability where the victim feels they must constantly appease the manipulator to avoid conflict. For example, a partner might threaten to end the relationship if they don't get their way, or imply that they will harm themselves if their demands aren't met. These tactics are highly effective because they tap into primal fears of rejection, loneliness, and responsibility for others' well-being. Over time, the victim may become hypervigilant, constantly monitoring their actions and words to avoid triggering negative reactions, which takes a significant toll on their mental health. Minimization is another powerful strategy in the manipulator's arsenal. This involves downplaying the victim's concerns, feelings, or experiences to make them significant. A manipulative partner might respond to an expression of hurt with phrases like, "You're overreacting," or "It's not that big of a deal." By trivializing the victim's emotions, the manipulator invalidates their experience and shifts the narrative to one where the victim's reactions are the problem, rather than the manipulator's behavior. This undermines the victim's confidence in their own emotional responses and fosters a sense of powerlessness. Silent treatment is another form of emotional manipulation that is less about words and more about withholding. By refusing to communicate, acknowledge, or engage, the manipulator creates an uncomfortable void that leaves the victim scrambling to restore connection. The silent treatment is not a mere act of avoiding conflict. It's a deliberate attempt to assert control by forcing the victim to seek reconciliation at any cost. This tactic can be particularly damaging in relationships because it preys on the human need for connection and resolution, leaving the victim feeling isolated and desperate. Psychologist Harriet Breicher once observed that emotional manipulators often exploit their victims' core vulnerabilities, such as the need for approval, fear of conflict, or desire for love and belonging. This makes the victim more susceptible to control because they're driven by an innate need to preserve the relationship even at the cost of their own well-being. For example, someone who values harmony might avoid addressing their partner's manipulative behavior to keep the peace, while someone with a fear of abandonment might go to great lengths to meet unreasonable demands, believing it's the only way to keep the relationship intact. The cumulative effects of emotional manipulation are deeply damaging. Victims often experience a diminished sense of self-worth as they internalize the manipulator's criticisms or false narratives. They may feel stuck in a cycle of dependency, unable to make decisions or assert boundaries without fear of reprisal. Over time, this erodes their autonomy and leaves them feeling trapped, unsure of how to reclaim their voice or sense of identity. From a psychological perspective, emotional manipulation doesn't just harm the victim's mental health, it disrupts their entire framework for understanding relationships, trust, and even their own emotions. Lack of reciprocity in a relationship is a dynamic where the effort, care, and emotional investment are one-sided, leaving one partner consistently giving more than they receive. Relationships thrive on balance, and reciprocity is the foundation that ensures both individuals feel valued, respected, and supported. When this balance is absent, it creates an emotional and practical inequity that gradually drains the person who is consistently giving, while enabling complacency or entitlement in the one who is taking. A relationship characterized by a lack of reciprocity often leaves one partner feeling unappreciated and invisible. Imagine a scenario where one person is always the first to initiate conversations, plan dates, or provide emotional support, while the other merely responds passively or contributes minimally. Over time, this creates a pattern where the giver feels more like a caretaker or a provider of convenience than an equal partner. This imbalance can lead to feelings of frustration, loneliness, and resentment as the giver begins to notice that their needs and efforts are rarely acknowledged or reciprocated. Psychologically, the absence of reciprocity disrupts the natural give and take dynamic that fosters intimacy and connection. In healthy relationships, acts of kindness, support, or care are met with mutual expressions of appreciation or a desire to give back. This exchange reinforces the bond and reassures both partners of their value to one another. However, in relationships lacking reciprocity, the person doing most of the giving may start to feel like their contributions are taken for granted. They may begin to question their worth or wonder if the relationship is built on genuine affection or mere convenience for the other person. A lack of reciprocity also erodes emotional safety. For instance, if one partner frequently shares their thoughts, vulnerabilities, and struggles only to be met with indifference or lack of engagement, they may feel unsupported and emotionally neglected. This dynamic can discourage further sharing, leading to a breakdown in communication and intimacy. The partner who feels unheard or unimportant might internalize these experiences, developing feelings of inadequacy or believing they are not deserving of reciprocal care. From a behavioral perspective, the absence of reciprocity often creates an enabling environment for selfishness or entitlement. The partner who consistently benefits from the other's effort without contributing may begin to see this dynamic as normal or even expected. This sense of entitlement can further perpetuate the imbalance as they fail to recognize the strain their lack of contribution places on the relationship. Over time, the giver may become exhausted, emotionally drained, or even resentful, while the taker remains oblivious to the harm caused by their lack of engagement. In some cases, the lack of reciprocity is not intentional but stems from differing emotional capacities or unspoken expectations. One partner may not realize the extent to which the other feels overburdened or unappreciated because these feelings are not openly communicated. However, even when unintentional, the effects are no less damaging. Relationships are built on the premise that both individuals are willing to invest their time, energy, and emotions in equal measure. When that investment is one-sided, the relational structure becomes unsustainable. Psychologist John Bowlby's attachment theory highlights the importance of reciprocal relationships in creating secure bonds. In secure attachments, both individuals feel equally responsible for nurturing and maintaining the connection. A lack of reciprocity disrupts this balance, often leaving the more invested partner feeling anxious about the relationship's future or avoidant of deeper emotional engagement to protect themselves from further hurt. This imbalance can lead to a vicious cycle, where the giver either continues to overextend themselves in an attempt to salvage the relationship or withdraw entirely, further deepening the disconnect. The absence of reciprocity can also manifest in practical ways, such as unequal distribution of responsibilities. For example, one partner might take on the majority of household tasks, financial burdens, or child-rearing duties, while the other contributes little to these shared responsibilities. Over time, this disparity not only breeds resentment, but also diminishes the sense of partnership and teamwork that is essential for a healthy relationship. The psychological toll of a lack of reciprocity is profound. It diminishes the giver's sense of self-worth and leaves them questioning whether their efforts are valued or even noticed. They may begin to doubt their ability to set boundaries or advocate for their needs, feeling trapped in a cycle of giving without receiving. This dynamic not only impacts their emotional health, but can also spill over into other areas of their life, affecting their confidence, energy, and ability to engage in future relationships. Continuous cycles of conflict occur when disagreements or tensions in a relationship are unresolved and repeatedly resurface, creating a repetitive and draining pattern. These cycles often stem from deeper issues that remain unaddressed, turning every disagreement into a familiar yet damaging script. Instead of fostering resolution, communication becomes a battleground where the same arguments, accusations, and emotional triggers play out over and over. This dynamic erodes trust, intimacy, and the overall health of the relationship, leaving both partners feeling trapped in an endless loop of negativity. These cycles is a failure to understand and address the root causes of conflict. For example, disagreements about surface-level issues like household chores or financial decisions may actually stem from underlying feelings of neglect, insecurity, or unmet expectations. When these deeper emotions are ignored or dismissed, the conflict cannot truly be resolved. Instead, each argument becomes another opportunity for those unresolved feelings to resurface, amplifying the intensity of the dispute. Psychologically, this repetitive conflict creates a pattern known as emotional flooding. Emotional flooding occurs when one or both partners become overwhelmed by the intensity of their emotions during an argument, making it difficult to think rationally or communicate effectively. This state often leads to heightened defensiveness, blame shifting, or withdrawal, none of which contribute to resolving the issue at hand. Over time, the anticipation of conflict can lead to chronic stress or anxiety as both partners brace themselves for the inevitable next fight. Continuous cycles of conflict are also fueled by destructive communication patterns. These include behaviors like criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, what psychologist Dr. John Gottman calls the four horsemen of the apocalypse in relationships. Criticism focuses on attacking a partner's character rather than addressing specific behaviors, while contempt involves expressions of disdain or superiority, such as eye-rolling or mocking. Defensiveness shifts blame rather than accepting responsibility, and stonewalling shuts down communication altogether. When these patterns dominate interactions, they not only prevent resolution but also deepen feelings of frustration, hurt, and disconnection. In many cases, these cycles persist because both partners feel misunderstood or invalidated. For instance, one person may express dissatisfaction with the relationship only to be met with defensiveness or dismissal from the other. This response reinforces the perception that their concerns are not being taken seriously, prompting them to escalate their tone or repeat the complaint in future discussions. Similarly, the partner who feels criticized may become increasingly defensive or withdrawn, perceiving every conversation as an attack. This mutual misunderstanding traps both individuals in a loop of unmet needs and growing resentment. Unresolved conflict also affects the way partners view each other over time. Each repeated argument reinforces negative narratives about the other person, such as "they never listen to me" or "they always overreact." These narratives, when left unchecked, become ingrained, coloring future interactions and making it difficult to see the partner in a positive light. This phenomenon, known as negative sentiment override, shifts the relationship dynamic from one of goodwill and cooperation to one of suspicion and hostility. The long-term effects of continuous conflict can be psychologically devastating. Constant exposure to unresolved arguments can lead to emotional exhaustion, where one or both partners feel drained and hopeless about the relationship's future. This state often manifests in feelings of apathy or disengagement, where the effort to repair the relationship no longer seems worth the emotional cost. For some, the cycles of conflict may also trigger symptoms of anxiety or depression, as they struggle to cope with the constant tension and instability. These cycles are particularly damaging because they often escalate over time. Minor disagreements that were once manageable may grow into larger disputes as unresolved feelings accumulate. For example, a simple disagreement about spending habits might evolve into a bitter argument about financial irresponsibility, perceived lack of support, or trust issues. This escalation creates an environment where even small triggers can ignite disproportionate reactions, further perpetuating the cycle. Continuous conflict also has a ripple effect on other areas of life. The stress and emotional turmoil from repeated arguments can affect one's ability to focus at work, maintain friendships, or engage in self-care. Additionally, if the couple has children, the persistent conflict can create an unstable home environment, leaving lasting psychological effects on the family as a whole. Children exposed to chronic parental conflict often struggle with emotional regulation and may internalize unhealthy communication patterns, carrying them into their own relationships later in life. Psychologists often emphasize the importance of breaking these cycles by addressing both the immediate behaviors and the underlying emotional needs driving the conflict. Without intentional effort from both partners to identify and resolve these deeper issues, the cycles will continue to repeat, deepening the divide between them and eroding the foundation of the relationship. Suppression of growth in a relationship refers to a situation where one or both individuals feel hindered, stifled, or constrained in their personal or relational development due to the dynamics of the partnership. In a healthy relationship, both individuals are encouraged to evolve, pursue their passions, and become better versions of themselves, whether personally or together as a couple. However, when growth is suppressed, it often leads to feelings of frustration, stagnation, and resentment, and can significantly damage the emotional and psychological well-being of both partners. Suppression of growth occurs when one partner, either consciously or unconsciously, discourages the other from pursuing their goals, dreams, or personal ambitions. This can manifest in various forms, from subtle criticism to overt control or neglect. For example, a partner who constantly belittles or dismisses the other's career aspirations can create an environment where the person feels undervalued and incapable of reaching their potential. Over time, this discouragement chips away at their self-esteem, making them question their abilities and whether they are deserving of success or happiness outside of the relationship. Emotional manipulation is often at the heart of this suppression, as one partner may use tactics such as guilt, shame, or fear to prevent the other from pursuing their ambitions. A partner might say, "If you loved me, you'd spend more time with me and not focus so much on your career." Or, "You're being selfish by wanting to travel so much." These comments subtly undermine the other person's desires and create a narrative that their needs are secondary to those of the partner. Over time, the individual may internalize these beliefs, sacrificing their growth in order to maintain harmony or avoid guilt. The suppression of growth can also arise from the fear of change. When one partner grows or changes in significant ways, the other might feel threatened or left behind. This can lead to resistance to change, where one person tries to maintain the status quo by discouraging their partner from evolving. For instance, if one partner undergoes a spiritual or intellectual awakening, the other might criticize or downplay this shift, fearing that the change will disrupt the dynamic of the relationship. This fear of losing the person as they evolve can make one partner hold the other back, even if unintentionally out of insecurity or a need to control. Suppression of growth can occur when a relationship becomes overly dependent or enmeshed, where both partners' identities become intertwined to the point of losing individuality. In these relationships, one person may feel compelled to sacrifice their personal goals, interests, or aspirations for the sake of the relationship or to please the other partner. For example, a person who has always wanted to further their education may put their dreams on hold to support their partner's career or to maintain peace in the relationship. The more they suppress their own growth, the more they may begin to feel resentful or disconnected from their own sense of purpose. The psychological impact of suppressed growth is profound. Over time, individuals who feel stifled in their relationships may experience feelings of inadequacy, lack of self-worth, and a diminished sense of identity. They might struggle with feelings of guilt for wanting something more or for pursuing personal goals that do not align with the partner's desires. This can lead to a sense of hopelessness or helplessness as they become convinced that their dreams and needs are not as important as maintaining the relationship or meeting the partner's expectations. From a psychological perspective, the suppression of growth can lead to the development of learned helplessness. This occurs when the individual feels that no matter what they do, they are unable to affect change or improve their situation. They may become passive or disengaged, withdrawing from their own desires and goals in favor of trying to keep the peace or avoid confrontation. This passivity can lead to feelings of emotional numbness or depression, as the person loses touch with their sense of purpose or personal fulfillment. The fear of losing a partner or being seen as selfish for wanting to grow can also lead to anxiety and self-doubt. The individual may begin to second-guess their own desires, questioning whether they are worth pursuing or if they are simply an attempt to escape the confines of the relationship. This internal conflict creates cognitive dissonance, where the person experiences a disconnect between their true desires and their actions. Over time, this dissonance erodes their sense of self, making them feel as though they are living someone else's life or sacrificing their happiness for the sake of others. In the long term, the suppression of growth leads to the deterioration of the relationship itself. As one partner stifles the other's development, they inadvertently create a dynamic of dependence and control, where both individuals become increasingly disconnected from their authentic selves. The person who is being suppressed may eventually feel resentful or trapped, as their needs for personal fulfillment and growth go unmet. The partner who is suppressing growth may, in turn, feel frustrated or insecure, fearing the loss of the connection or the changes in the relationship that accompany personal growth. Psychologically, relationships that fail to nurture individual growth are often stagnant and emotionally unfulfilling. Growth is not just about achieving personal success or external milestones. It is about fostering an environment where both individuals feel supported, valued, and encouraged to pursue their unique paths. When this growth is suppressed, both partners lose the opportunity to experience the full richness and potential of the relationship, ultimately undermining its foundation and leading to a cycle of dissatisfaction, disconnection, and emotional distress. In conclusion, when we find ourselves in relationships that exhibit signs like erosion of trust, disrespect for boundaries, emotional manipulation, lack of reciprocity, continuous cycles of conflict, or suppression of growth, it's crucial to recognize that these behaviors are not just temporary bumps in the road. They are indications that the foundation of the relationship may be deeply compromised. These patterns, when left unaddressed, not only harm the emotional well-being of both individuals, but also create an environment where connection, mutual respect, and personal growth are stifled. A healthy relationship should uplift, inspire, and support both partners in their journey, allowing each person to thrive both individually and together. If you see these signs, it's important to have the courage to reassess the relationship, set boundaries, and make choices that protect your mental and emotional health. Relationships are meant to be sources of strength, not sources of emotional depletion. Good luck on your journey towards healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on these important points and for considering the value of your own well-being. May you find the strength to make decisions that honor your worth and lead you to the growth and happiness you deserve.